Hey, my name is Brent here on Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Today on the channel, we are looking at an expansion to Little Town called Artisans. Of course, the game Little Town, a worker placement game in which you're sending out these neat little lumberjack meeples along across the board to activate buildings and collect resources and build more buildings and whatnot. And so in Artisans, you can then specialize your workers to be more efficient. Let me show you what's in this in the radar overview. My final forecast coming up. Cue the Fender. So the radar overview for Artisans, an expansion for Little Town, looks something like this. I'm going to assume that you know how to play the base game of Little Town. If you don't, well, this is going to be a little bit awkward. Not awkward, but it'll be a little bit confusing. So I highly suggest, if you're interested in this expansion, find out how to play the base game of Little Town first, and then you can check out this expansion. This expansion adds a new board. As you can see, I have just the base game board set up on the side here, and then it has this small board on the side. It comes with a few new buildings, as well as some new private objective cards, which will all relate to this expansion. Depending on how many players are playing, you will get one of these little blank artisan cards to go in between every two, except the ones on the end. So this is set up for a 3-player game, but in a 4-player game, you would only get 3 meeples. So how does this expansion work? Well, anytime you put a worker out, so say I put this worker out on the board somewhere, I can trigger one of the 2 artisans or upgrades tied to this worker, depending on what the action is. So if I put the worker out to gather resources, if I would have a card that was like this, it would gather whatever resources that it would normally get, plus 1 wood. Whereas if I would put this worker out and it was like this, if I put it out to build, I could build something for one less rock. So on a future turn, maybe I put this guy out and I put him to build. Then he could also use this special ability. So each of these workers in the middle will kind of have 2 different special abilities that they can work off of, and then the ones on the end will only have 1. And then, so that's kind of what you will be doing. You'll be specializing the workers. If I ever say I put this guy out to gather resources, I obviously cannot then trigger this. But if I put him out to gather, I can then, after I gather, I could hire this artisan for the cost of 1 fish. And this would replace this blank one. And now it would upgrade, this guy or this guy, whichever one. So if I use this one on a future turn to gather, I could trigger this. Or if I put this one out on a future turn to build something, I could activate this or trigger this. Let's say I put this one out and I do the gather action. So I go and I gather some fish, and I don't want to trigger this. If I don't trigger the bonus, I could then upgrade. So then I could then, move from a level 1 to a level 2. And I would have to, once again, spend 1 fish, and then this would get replaced. I would gain the victory points in the top right corner, but then whenever I would send, one of these 2 guys out later on in the game for the gather action, I could gather whatever I get, plus either a rock or a wheat. And then, so then you have level 3, so gets you more and more resources, a rock or a rock and a coin. And then level 4, these would be the highest, obviously, and they'd be the best. So, they cost a little bit more, gaining victory points. And then anytime this gather action, you can then just pay 1 single good up to 3 times to get 2 victory points each. So, essence, I could sell 3 wood for 2 victory points each, and then I get 6 victory points. And then, this one is sell 1 good for, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, for $6. Or I gather, I get a wheat, a wood, and 2 victory points. or a water, a rock, and two coins, or trade any two for 5 victory points. So they will let you do more and more things. And then, of course, on the other side of things, this side helps you build for cheaper. So, level 1s, -1 resource. Level 2s is kind of, two wood, or either a wood, or either 2 wood, or maybe a rock and a wood, or 2 rock, 2 either or. So there's that, and then again, as you get further and further up, they just become better and better and help you build for cheaper and cheaper. Of course, you can only ever go to level 4, and then so at the end of the game triggers as per usual, just like normal. You would have already gotten these victory points as you go, and this expansion just lets you build and gather quicker. That's pretty much the skinny of it. It gives you more buildings as well. So, this building, there's a little aid here. There's only one of these reference for, but this is, what would this be? This is the museum. At the end of the game, you gain 5 victory points for every artisan you've upgraded up to level 4. And then so this one lets you reactivate a worker. This one gives you victory points to the total of artisans that you have when you put that worker out. So if you've upgraded all 5 of them and you put a guy there and you activate this building, you would then get $5. So there's a few different buildings. Again, they all reference this expansion. And then you can also add in these private objectives. 2 victory points, you upgrade 1 construction artisan past level 2 or higher. Upgrade past level, or all the way up to level 4. Upgrade 1 gather artisan up to level 4. So these ones are all about upgrading your workers. So there you go. That's what you get in Artisans, an expansion for Little Town. Let's move on over now and take a look at the final forecast. So the final forecast for Little Town Artisans, or just Artisans and expansion for Little Town, looks something like this. As you see, the game box, it makes a bigger picture. But I think this insert, or the insert in the base game, could get thrown out, and you could just put all of this in the main box and save some space. The box is a little bit big, and inside of the expansion box, you just have a whole bunch of the artisan cards. They're not tiles, they're cards. And then a few more buildings and some extra, private objectives. Of course, these are in a language that I do not speak, so they will stay in the packaging. But what are my thoughts on this expansion? When I originally reviewed Little Town, I gave an 85% chance meeples, and I said I would love to have more content for the game, because I loved Little Town. I love the worker placement. I love it that every game is going to feel different, that you're going to be building different worker placement spots, whether it's going to gain you resources, or you take those resources and then, exchange them for different resources or just straight victory points. And so Little Town, a game that I love quite a bit. I was excited. Artisans, expansion, what would it bring? I feel that this expansion, it's almost like addition by subtraction. So it's addition because it gives players more opportunity to gain more resources, to gain more efficiency, to have some workers be able to build faster or build for cheaper or gain more resources. So it has that. At the same time, I feel the subtraction is it slows the game down and it makes that puzzle just a little bit tighter, a little bit too tight for me. I understand that in the base game, if you don't have an opportunity to create money, create an income, you're probably going to lose the game. So for me, I make sure whenever I play the game, I have enough buildings for the amount of players that will produce money. Either produce money or, trade 4 wheat for $4 or whatever, because I actually don't even think that's one of the buildings. But, if you're familiar with Little Town, that'll make sense. Building that resource into money. There's enough ways for virtually everybody to build a building to produce money. Because if you don't have money in Little Town, you're going to lose because you cannot use other people's buildings. And a big thing is using other people's buildings. And so it's a tight economy. This expansion kind of opens it up because different artisans, when they collect, will either gain you victory points victory points or resources or money. So then you can choose different, paths. At this point I need, wood or a rock. At this point I need money so I can use other people's buildings. So it opens that up, but to me it slows the game down because you got to remember which worker you just put out. And of course, at the beginning of each round, you know exactly which worker. But you can sometimes forget, be like, I have these two left. They were side by side. Which one did I use? Because if I use the one on the right, I can activate this or that. If I use the one on the left, I can activate this or that. And you have to remember those things. And so for some, they're going to really like the specialization of your workers, that you can make some of your workers do better in the gathering or better in the production or the building steps. But for me, I just felt that it slowed the game down. And I was one saying I would love to have more content for Little Town. And now that I think about it, if I say I want more content for Little Town, I think I just want new buildings and maybe another map that have different layouts. Because where this gives you, they're not more buildings. It's just something else to think about when you're putting your worker out, because you're like, if I put this worker out and I activate the artisan, then I can't upgrade it. So I'm going to put him out, or I'm going to put this worker out. And then I'm going to gather all that, but I'm not going to trigger what he's actually going to gain me benefit, so that I can then use the resources to upgrade. It just slows the game down. And for me, if I'm wanting more content for Little Town, I'm just wanting more buildings. And this has a few more buildings, but they're just referencing this expansion. So to me, this is all right. I'm going to give it a 60% chance of meeples. This might really open the door for a lot of people who had a negative experience with the tightness in Little Town, but I think that's what I like. I like that tight aspect of every moment or every turn matters when you're putting out a worker. So 60% chance of meeples for artisans, an expansion for Little Town. My name is Brent. Till next time, grab your umbrella. The forecast is cloudy with a chance of meeples.